Wanted to study Mars geology, but when I started my graduate school career, I had an opportunity to work on Jupiter data, particularly with Hubble, calibrating some of the early images before Hubble had its corrective optics, right before the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet impacts into Jupiter. And then we had this great encounter where we had all these commentary pieces hitting in, but it was a new camera on Hubble after the corrective optics. So, wow, all these great new images. And I kind of got sold into, this is really what I want to do, study the atmospheres of planets.
Hubble Space Telescope's been looking at Jupiter for the past 25 years, and this particular image taken just a few days ago, we can see the dynamic cloud bands, all the swirling clouds and colors on Jupiter, of course, and the Great Red Spot. But we also see wave features and smaller storms in the atmosphere, so we're learning a lot about Jupiter's weather, basically, by doing these Hubble observations.
I would say I'm not really good at looking towards the future of envisioning exactly where I'll be in 10 years, but I want to see more missions to the outer solar system. I think we have a lot left to do out there, and I am looking forward to the day when we are ready to launch a mission to Neptune or even another mission to Saturn, and I certainly hope to be parts of those missions.
Blobs stayed right where they were. So he made a catalog. Blobs stayed right where they were. So he made a catalog of basically things to avoid that weren't comets. And the thing that is a wonderful irony is what he actually had discovered were some of the most dramatic and beautiful objects in the entire universe.
Right.
He discovered things like dead stars or stars being born, or what we now know are very distant galaxies. So in fact, Messier found some of the most fascinating things in the sky.
Yep. What's very interesting is the first object that we'll talk about, the Crab Nebula, he was looking actually for the return of Halley's Comet himself, which was predicted to show up in the constellation of Taurus in that period. And so he was scanning to find Halley's Comet and came across this object we're going to talk about.
So the catalog is just numbered basically in the order that Messier discovered these things. And so we're going to start with M1. And just like Kevin said, M1 is something called the Crab Nebula. So we actually have a depiction here of where the Crab Nebula is in the sky and a little bit about what it looks like. So you can see it's actually here in the constellation Taurus. It's going to be honing in on that. And as this begins to pan in, look, there's a fuzzy little thing there. And that's what he saw, and that's what he thought might be a comet. But as we pan into it even more, you see that there's wonderful dramatic structure. And what this turns out to be is an exploded star. It's what we call a supernova remnant. So there was a star long ago that exploded, and it actually spread its material over hundreds and hundreds of light years. And in the middle, there's the dead core of a star called a neutron star. Neutron stars are amazing. They have the density of Mount Everest pushed into every teaspoonful of material. And they actually rotate hundreds of times a second. And I remember that you actually knew what year the star exploded.
Yes, so historians have figured out that this is associated with the Chinese sighting of a guest star, they called it, that was visible, so bright it could be seen during the daytime, and that was 1054. So we're very sure when this star actually exploded.
Now, Kevin is an amazing amateur astronomer. He actually takes pictures of these objects with his own telescope. So should we go to some of the images that you've taken yourself?
Sure, why not? In this case, I don't have one of M1. We'll see others, but I wanted to show you both this chart and where M1 can be found. Do you see the constellation of Taurus here? This little cluster of stars called the Hyades is V-shaped, and it marks the horns of the bull of Taurus. He's up and to the right of Orion, very easily spotted in the winter sky. And you take the lower horn and look at it with a telescope, and you're sure to find M1 if you just sweep around the field of view with that star in it, because it's very close to that star named Zeta Tauri. So I want you to know that in the Hubble catalog that's been released, we have a star chart like this for every Messier that's in the catalog. So even if you don't know anything about the Messier objects, you'll know basically where to find them in the sky, what season to look for them in, what constellation they're in, and we also tell you in the album what telescope is a good one to look for this object with, and what time of the month or what month of the year you should be looking for it.
So keeping with the theme of dead stars, there's another one of my Messier objects that's one of my favorites. It's called the Ring Nebula. And so we talked about M1 being the first one. This is all the way at M57. Now the Ring Nebula is in the constellation Lyra. And this is actually a different sort of dead star. The first one we saw exploded violently in a supernova. This star is basically gently unraveling itself into space. It was a star that was more about the mass of the sun. It's dying and actually losing shells of gas around it. And in the middle, there's the remnant of this tiny little star, which is now cooling off and basically dying. So the Ring Nebula is a beautiful, beautiful object, and you can see some of the complexity that the Hubble Space Telescope discovered when it actually took many different visuals of this Ring Nebula. So the thing that I really love about the Ring Nebula is it's not very easy to see in a telescope. You have to use a special technique to see it. So tell us a bit about your observations of the Ring Nebula and how you see an object like this.
Okay, sure, I'd be happy to. It's one of my favorites. It's a great summer favorite for amateur astronomers. It's high in the sky, and it's fairly easy to locate in the constellation of Lyra. But as Michelle said, it's small and a little bit hard to find. And when you put in an eyepiece that has more magnification, it dims, and it gets a little tricky to see, especially the hole that's in the center. What you have to do, and this is a trick that we amateurs use, is look to the side of the object, because the edge of your eye is more sensitive to light than the center is, oddly enough. You have rods and cones in your eye, and the rods are along the edge. So at night, your peripheral vision is better than your center vision. and you can see things that move. So as a trick, we get the object in the telescope and then look to the side of the object and wiggle the telescope a little bit, and you can actually see it better when you do that. Especially the hole in the middle, it looks like a big smoke ring in the sky when you use those tricks. Now you won't see the center star because that's pretty faint, and although I took this photo with just general DSLR and a modest telescope, the camera is more sensitive than your eye, and so it can pick up on the star. You'd need probably a 14-inch telescope to see that star.
So we're going from the theme of dead stars to something now very different, and that's the birth of stars. Messier actually discovered things that represent all the different phases of the life cycles of stars. So we're going to start talking about young stars.
Yeah, and while we walk over to talk about the young stars over here, I wanted to remind everybody to continue to send in your questions. We're getting some really great ones. We're still here at Goddard Space Flight Center talking about Hubble's Messier catalog, and now we're going to be talking about dead stars. So take it away. I'll get out of your way.
Well, that's right. These are stars that are being born. The next object we're going to talk about is one of my favorites in the sky. It's like an old friend returning every time the fall sky rolls around, and that's M42. This is the Orion Nebula. And as you can see in this wonderful animation, what the Orion Nebula really is a giant cloud of dust and gas. And inside it, there are stars forming that are lighting up this cloud. And there are actually 4 very bright stars at the very heart of the nebula called the trapezium cluster. And these stars are actually larger than the sun, more massive than the sun and brighter. And the light from them is lighting up the whole area that we know of as the Orion Nebula. To me, this is one of the most beautiful images ever taken by Hubble. It's not only beautiful, but it's very dramatic when you think about this is a cloud of dust and gas, many, many hundreds of light years across. And inside it, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of new stars forming right now. So this is a beautiful object, and I have to say that the image you took of this is spectacular. I mean, you are an amazing astrophotographer. Let's take a look at what you got with this one.
Well, it is one of my better efforts, but they're all work. And I want to really communicate that taking pictures is another aspect of astronomy that's enjoyable, has its technical challenges. But I've spent most of my life observing these things with binoculars or a telescope, and it's as much fun. It's probably more fun than trying to take pictures of them, which is just hard. So here you see an image of Orion Nebula, and I want to point out the contrast between this one and this one. It took Hubble about 500 different pointings, mosaics, stitched together to form this image. Because Hubble zooms in, it has such high magnification, it zooms into a smaller part of the object. This could all fit in the field of view of my telescope. When you're looking at this object just with a telescope and not worried about taking pictures, you want to look for it beneath the 3 stars that form Orion's belt, the sheath for his sword, if you will. Right in that area, from a dark spot, you can see a faint cloud. And put a telescope on it, and you can see there, right there is an image of where M42 is. Again, this is on our website, so you can find these for all the Messier objects there. But you put a telescope on it, and you can see this trapezium, 4 little stars in a trapezoid shape, and enjoy the dark and light bands of this nebula. It's truly spectacular.
Messier actually found a number of examples of young stars. In the case of the Orion Nebula, the stars are still forming in this cloud of dust and gas. But then there are other stars that are a little farther along that have actually moved out of the clouds they were born in. And in many cases, just the radiation and also the particle winds coming off these bright young stars blows away the cloud. And so the next thing we're going to is an example of a young cluster of stars. Stars that have all formed probably in the last at least tens of millions of years. It doesn't sound very young to us, but for stars that they are. And this is a cluster called the Pleiades. And the Pleiades is a wonderful thing to see in the autumn and winter sky. It always is wonderful for me because I know that wonderful, beautiful autumn sky is rolling around. These images look very different. So here's the image that you took of this young cluster of stars. And in fact, the Hubble image is it's so much resolution and so much focus, it's only a tiny part of your image here.
Right.
So compare the Hubble image that we have here with what you were able to see with the Pleiades.
So it's a very tiny portion. The Pleiades is a naked eye object, and it's somewhat like 3 or 4 times the size of the full moon. So it's very big on the sky. This image taken by Hubble of part of the gas and dust surrounding these stars is right in between this bright star called Meropa and these 2 little stars next to it. So it's a very, very tiny portion of the actual Pleiades. Pleiades is also known as the Seven Sisters. A lot of people mistake it for the Little Dipper because it has this dipper shape. And with your eye, you really only see 6. You know, there's this legend of the missing Pleiad because you don't see 7. But this cluster is also known in Japan as Subaru. And so when you look at the logo on the back of a Subaru, you're looking at this star pattern. Most people don't know that. So it's a very, very beautiful cluster, and best appreciated actually in binoculars or a small telescope where you can see just these diamonds on a black background.
So we're talking about families of stars, and the type of cluster that the Pleiades is something called an open cluster. And these are stars that form relatively close to each other in one of these big clouds. But the sun was probably in a cluster like this billions of years ago. But over that time, we've been around the galaxy so many times that just the gravitational interaction between the stars has peeled off all the other members of our star cluster. We don't really know where in the sky our brother and sister stars are. So an open cluster is a family of stars that all form together. And actually, we're going to go over and talk a bit more about some different families of stars now.
Yeah, and once again, while we're walking over, I just wanted to remind everyone to keep sending in your questions. I'm getting some really, really great ones. And we're here at Goddard Space Flight Center talking about Hubble's Messier catalog. So continue sending in your questions, and I'll let you guys talk about clusters.
Thanks, Aaron.
So here's another example of an open cluster. This is M11, which is also called the Wild Duck Cluster. And as I said before, open clusters are stars that formed together relatively recently in the last millions or tens of millions of years and are slowly peeling apart over time. So this is another one that you have a very different image. Hubble is taking sort of a picture here of the heart of this cluster, and then you have a picture of the larger cluster so people can see that.
Right. Neither one of them look much like a wild duck, do they? But if you had a small telescope or a pair of binoculars and looked at this object, which is in the summer sky in the Milky Way, you will see a V-shaped grouping of stars. The brighter stars are V-shaped and reminded the early observers of a flight of ducks or geese that are characteristically, you know, flying in a V. When I look at this, and this is one of my favorites too, you notice right away, and so did Messier. He wrote in his catalog about this, that there's a very bright star in the center of the cluster. Hard to make out here because it just gets lost with all the others. But it's very, very noticeable when you look at it for the first time in a telescope. This amazing grouping of stars and this one bright one right in the middle. Now I find this cluster is particularly fun to look at in higher magnification, and I like to use a zoom eyepiece. So I look at it at low magnification and the stars are really tight, and then as you twist the eyepiece, it zooms in and you see just hundreds more. It's a remarkably beautiful open cluster, and there's something like, hundreds of stars in the cluster.
That's right. Now, an open cluster can have dozens or hundreds of stars, but there are actually much larger star clusters as well. And certainly the largest ones that are in our own galaxy, the Milky Way, are called the globular clusters. And we have an absolutely spectacular picture of a globular cluster here. This is the globular cluster M15. So this is the 15th thing on the list of things that were not comets. Right. And this is actually a cluster of stars that contains millions of stars. Now, astronomers believe that globular clusters are actually ancient clusters. They probably formed very early on in the lifetime of our galaxy. And if you think about the Milky Way galaxy, we live in a spiral galaxy that's kind of shaped like a frisbee. It's a disk of stars and gas and dust. But the globular clusters actually orbit around the entire galaxy, almost kind of like a swarm of angry bees. They're going all different directions around the Milky Way. And in fact, globular clusters were one of the first ways that we discovered our own place in the Milky Way. It turns out that we're nowhere near the center of the Milky Way. We live out in the suburbs, about 3/4 of the way out into the disk from the center. So that's a long way from the middle of the galaxy. And all of these globular clusters orbit around the center of mass of our galaxy. So astronomers a long time ago realized that most of the globular clusters were in one half of the sky, and there were fewer on the other half of the sky. And that's because we were looking from a vantage point of being very far out from the center of the galaxy. So whenever I see globular clusters, I'm really aware of the place, the role that they had in actually giving us a map as to where we are in the galaxy.
And it's really a good thing that we're not on a planet inside a globular cluster, because we wouldn't see much of the sky at all, right? Also, it would be like daytime all the time.
You just look at all of those stars packed into that little area.
Yes, so it's very good for observing that we are where we are.
So you've got another great image here.
Yeah, so this image is fun because I took it 2 nights ago, right? And I took it with a very small telescope. But it's in the constellation of Pegasus, the flying horse, which if you go out into night sky, will appear as a square. They call it the square of Pegasus, very prominent square in the sky. And I like to consider it like a baseball diamond because it's oriented that way. And this object is located off first base. So you go up to first base and there's an L-shaped string of stars. It's right at the tip of the L. Very easy to find.
Right there.
There you go. Yep.
So we've been talking about families of stars, the star clusters, and in fact the largest families of stars in the universe are the galaxies.
The telescope is going to be trying to go to acquire some guide stars in just a few minutes here. The stock is the Space Telescope Operations Control Center, where we send commands to the spacecraft. On a daily basis, we have to send up what's known as command loads.
Accepted. DTMR is good. Step 3 is complete.
Because the computers on Hubble are very old and they have very little memory, in fact, most of your memory sticks today are 20, 30, 100 times bigger than Hubble, we have to send up essentially a load of all the commands Hubble's going to be doing for the next 24 hours.
On a routine basis, we always keep 24 hours of instructions on board, so it's routinely updating for the new sequence 24 hours in advance.
We'll start with doing our premise uplink.
Hubble is always working, it's always doing something, it's always doing some sort of observation or calibration or getting ready for the next task.
We'll be logging on forward at 14:33:17.
Hubble is truly a 24/7, 365-day-a-year instrument, so the Hubble can keep on going. It never stops.
And we are configured. It's been verified.
Now we do have to, because of this low Earth orbit we're in, the actual observations, when we're taking a picture of something or doing a science observation, we actually have to wait because sometimes the Earth gets in the way. So we have to pause, wait until the Earth gets out of the way as we go back around and start the observation back up.
You have constraints. You don't want the optics pointing at the sun, and you don't want the instruments to have their shutters open when you're looking at the Earth, because the Earth is bright for them. And then we have the South Atlantic Anomaly, the SAA, which is a portion of the Earth where we get proton hits that will affect the electronics in Hubble and can also affect the instruments in Hubble. And so we have to plan out very carefully our targets and observations. We have a timeline that's laid out to maximize the efficiency of it.
Hubble can actually take observations during day and night passes. Every 95 minutes, we go around the Earth. The batteries will charge from the solar rays during the day pass, and then at night, batteries power the observatory so we can continue observing. The scheduling with Hubble, we're trying to put it together as efficiently as possible, minimize our gaps. The goal is to constantly keep it busy.
We're constrained to a certain extent, but whenever we have visibility, we are observing.
The demand for use of the Hubble Space Telescope from scientists around the world is very high.
Hubble is at its most productive. It's got some of the best instruments that have ever been on board it. There's a very high demand. Hubble's performing exceptionally well.
2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis. The final visit to enhance the vision of Hubble into the deepest grandeur of our universe.
Since the final Space Shuttle servicing mission, we're using Hubble to get the best kind of science return we can from the suite of instruments that we have. So our focus now is on making sure we get the best science while it's still operating so well.
Luckily, at the end of the last servicing mission, we were actually left with a telescope in great condition, but Hubble is getting older and older. It's a very old telescope.
Now, 10 years after the last servicing mission, we can't rely upon servicing missions to fix things, so we have to rely upon our own ingenuity to be able to figure out if something does fail, what are the alternative paths that we have.
For the telescope to keep giving us this peak science, we need lots of things to be working together very well on the telescope. We need a pointing accuracy system that is outstanding and keeping that whole system healthy and functioning so that we can point Hubble very accurately even while it's whizzing around Earth in its orbit.
For the telescope to be able to do the science it needs to do, we have to hold it very, very steady. There is actually a little bit of motion. I mean, it's hard. We're zooming around the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour, so it's hard to hold the telescope perfectly like that. The gyros are working really good.
The gyroscopes can sense motion in each direction. And so because of the gyroscopes that we have on board and how sensitive they are in terms of sensing motion, that we can keep our cameras steady.
Gyros are very good at measuring these very small rates. The fine guidance sensors are actually sort of used, I always like to describe it as backseat drivers. And they constantly tap on the gyro's shoulders, it's about once a second. And they keep saying, turn left, a little bit more right, a little bit left, a little bit right. I mean, it must be driving the gyros nuts. So the fine guidance sensors allow you that really fine control, but actually it's the gyroscopes driving the telescope. And they're doing a perfectly good job here. Everything looks good, our star is the right brightness. The reason that is because we need to make sure we have the correct guide stars. One of the things we look at is the brightnesses, and that's what we're measuring here. Those are about right for what the stars were. But also, we wanted to make sure they were exactly as far apart as we thought they were going to be. And it did. It did a check, and it passed a very, very tight tolerance check to make sure that those were the right stars. So we know we're locked up on the stars. We got a good lock here. The gyroscopes are very critical because to be able to move from one position to another position, the gyroscopes are the only thing that can tell us how we can do that. We have 6 gyroscopes on board Hubble. Currently, 3 of them are still working. And 3 is sort of what people used to think of as the minimum number, but we have developed a science mode where we only need 1 gyro.
A big part of our job is to make sure that we can extend the life of Hubble and continue doing the high performance science that we're doing for many more years.
And what we've done is we've gone through all the critical components of Hubble and said, how can we potentially make them last longer, as you might do with your own car as it's getting more miles on it. The gyroscopes have been our most problematic piece of hardware, so I helped lead an effort to develop a 2-gyro science mode. And we were able to use that mode on orbit and be able to perform science. And then learning from that, we actually developed a 1-gyro science mode that we've been able to test on orbit, but we haven't been called on to use. But in the end, possibly 5 to 10 to 15 years from now, when we're down to potentially our last gyroscope, that is the mode we will be in. Before we do anything on orbit for the first time, we have to test it out on the ground. And we're very lucky to have what we call the VEST, the Vehicle Electrical System Test Facility. And the key with the Vehicle Electrical System Test Facility is it's an exact copy of the main part of the telescope where all the electronics are. And it has the mechanical bays, it has the computers, the electronic boxes installed in there, and it has the cables and harnesses in there. And in fact, when we were building the VEST, we had the quality engineers came to us and said, you're not doing these cables exactly the way you should be doing them. You know, we've got better standards now. And our thing was, we're trying to build a copy of what we have on orbit. And so what you have in the VEST is an exact electrical copy of the Hubble Space Telescope. Every orbit as we come around the Earth, to be able to get our attitude correct, to get ourselves steady and locked on, the fine guidance sensors and the gyroscopes are key to that. And that's why those are the 2 of the subsystems that are on the top of our list as far as having contingency plans for and monitoring the health and safety of those and making sure we have them in peak performance. When something fails on Hubble, or we have an anomaly, something we don't understand, one of my jobs is to bring together the experts, which may be a thermal engineer, a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, a software engineer, all these different people. And we'll say, you know, how do we deal with this issue? And how can we work around it and return back to peak science? What you do is you come up with a list of what is available to you on the telescope in terms of potential. I could close this relay or open that relay or turn on this box. And I am continually amazed. You have a telescope on orbit that you can't even see. I mean, all you're doing is looking at the data coming down to you from the ground. These experts are able to use their ingenuity and come up with ways to continue to operate Hubble. And everything looks excellent, and we have no reason not to expect that Hubble will last until the late 2020s and beyond.
I personally am extremely grateful to the Hubble operations team, these people who work day and night to keep Hubble operating providing exquisite science return, giving us the information that we need to know how Hubble's doing. Is it doing the kind of accurate pointing that we need? Is it getting the sensitivity in the various wavelengths of light in the various instruments that we need to have to do the science? Are we able to calibrate those observations in an accurate way? We couldn't do any of those scientific analyses if we didn't have this team of operations experts behind the scenes making sure that the details of Hubble's technical operations are being monitored, being handled, being managed, being planned in a near perfect way.